Hey everyone, this is Paul Gale from paulgalenetwork.com, and thank you for joining me today for video game news. It is November 19th, 2021, and these are the top stories of the day. To kick things off, we have something interesting to check out from Rockstar Games. This is regarding the Grand Theft Auto, the Trilogy, the Definitive Edition, and its kind of unfortunate release. This is Rockstar's response on it regarding the quality of the title, what they're planning to do going forward, etc. So let me just read it for you. Hi everyone, we wanted to provide an update regarding the unexpected technical issues that came to light as part of the launch of Grand Theft Auto, the Trilogy, the Definitive Edition. Firstly, we want to sincerely apologize to everyone who has encountered issues playing these games. The Grand Theft Auto series and the games that make up this iconic trilogy are as special to us as we know they are to fans around the world. The updated versions of these classic games did not launch in a state that meets our own standards of quality or the standards our fans have come to expect. We have ongoing plans to address the technical issues and to improve each game going forward. With each planned update, the games will reach the level of quality that they deserve to be. A new title update is on the way in the coming days for all versions of Grand Theft Auto, the Trilogy, the Definitive Edition, that will address a number of issues. We will update everyone as soon as it is live. In the meantime, it pains us to mention that we are hearing reports of members of the development teams being harassed on social media. We would kindly ask our community to please maintain a respectful and civil discourse around this release as we work through these issues. While one of the goals of the Definitive Editions was to allow players to enjoy these games on modern platforms for many years to come, we also understand that some of you would still like to have the previous classic versions available for purchase. We will be adding the classic PC versions of Grand Theft Auto 3, Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and Grand Theft Auto San Andreas back to the Rockstar store shortly as a bundle. Additionally, everyone who has purchased Grand Theft Auto, the Trilogy, the Definitive Edition for PC from the Rockstar Store through June 30th, 2022 will receive these classic versions in their Rockstar Games launcher library at no additional cost. We will update everyone as soon as these are back in the Rockstar Store. Once again, we'd like to thank everyone for their patience and understanding while we work through these updates to ensure these games meet everyone's justifiably high standards. Sincerely, Rockstar Games. Now, normally when a press release comes out like this, I go over it and I provide you, the gist of the news, still accurate, but not necessarily reading through everything. I felt like this was worth reading because it definitely gives a deep look at what's going on in the company. They brought this game out, which is 3 of their very highly regarded games, some of the most influential titles in the open sandbox genre, if you will, that came out in the 2000s, really defined a lot of games going forward. Obviously, some of the best-selling titles of all time, something that people really wanted, and the launch was a failure, which is very interesting to see that coming from Rockstar Games. Like, imagine if Nintendo in the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection that came out, last year, totally botched one of the ports, whether it was Super Mario 64, Super Mario Galaxy, or Super Mario Sunshine, where there was just massive glitches left and right. Not glitches that, existed back in the game that for preservation standpoints, they still left a part of it, like Mario on King Bob-omb's Battlefield, how he's a little bit of a smaller polygon model farther away from the screen and he looks kind of funny, and then when you come up close, okay, he's back to normal again. Not like that. That still remains, but I'm talking true glitches, things that are far worse than they were in the original version. Broken bugs all around, clipping. You just don't expect that from a giant company. You kind of saw this type of problem with CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk 2077. They bit a little bit more than they could chew. You could also say that they haven't been around as long. They don't have as much money in their pockets, haven't developed as many games. Yeah, certain things shouldn't have been handled the way they were regardless. Like, you did know this was the quality of these, base Xbox One, base PS4 versions, yet you still allowed them to show up without showing them ahead of time. That was wrong. But overall, how many SKUs for a company that size? A little bit too ambitious, and the game failed. It still sold very well, but the failure around the name kind of ran deep, and they had to refund gamers and all that kind of stuff. But from the heavy hitters like Nintendo, Rockstar, Sony Santa Monica, think of Microsoft if they released the Halo Master Chief Collection with this many flaws. Not to say that it was perfect, not to say that any of these companies release perfect games, but from such a highly established franchise, this is kind of embarrassing. You expect more. I'm not here to, bring shame to Rockstar because, hey, accidents happen. I'm looking at, are you going to fix it? What have you done so far, and what are you going to do? And I think that they're doing good. All versions of the game suffer. It's not like, just the Nintendo Switch port wasn't handled well, or just the PS4 version not handled well. No, there are problems all around. On the PC version, it was pulled from the store. You could not even access something that you bought. That's pretty bad. You'll be getting it back. They'll be giving you the original trilogy for free to anyone who purchased the game through June 30th of 2022. So that's kind of nice. So you can still take advantage of it. Like if you want to hop back in and buy this trilogy definitive edition now, you could go ahead and get it, and you will eventually get the original trilogy in their original graphical presentation for free. That's kind of cool. For all of those versions, Xbox and its variety of consoles in the family, PlayStation and Nintendo, will be getting updates. They're doing them in sequences too, which I guess does make sense. If you look at CD Projekt Red with Cyberpunk 2077, it took multiple patches to bring it up. If they took too long to release one big patch, if that patch didn't do enough, it would be kind of game over. People would lose a lot of interest. Why talk about this game? Why wait for the game if it's taking months to get to a decent level of play and there are still flaws? But if, every several weeks you are giving, noticeably improved patches until ultimately it is the game everybody wanted, you could say, well, I'm playing it along the way, appreciating that it's getting better, or I could hop in at any one time and now buy it because now, based off of what other people are saying, it's solid enough. Or you could be in the camp where it's still being talked about, still not perfect, but it looks like it's getting there, and buy it several months in. But to have radio silence, that's not what a company wants. So releasing updates through multiple points in time seems to be the right way to go. They seem to be sincere about it. How did something like this go by? There are high standards. Should they have worked more closely internally and with the external developers on making this as solid as it should be? Yes, but like I said, I'm not here to bring shame on them. Things happen. It's just kind of unexpected from this big of a company, but props to them on handling it well going forward, it seems. I wouldn't mind also some kind of little drop to console gamers who bought it. Not to say, a full-on, here's the original trilogy for you too, because in some cases, like Nintendo, the Nintendo Switch, nor did any Nintendo console previously have the 3 available. So that's a little bit too much of a give. But some type of discount, I don't know, some retroactive perk like that maybe. Maybe it's too much. Hard to say. Let me know what you think. It's kind of interesting when a company has this kind of problem happen. I've said it in the past, the digital era and patches, it's kind of a win-win and a lose-lose in some ways. Yes, the old adage from Mr. Miyamoto, a delayed game can be good, but a game that's rushed is bad forever. Paraphrasing that, no longer holds true today. You don't have to delay a game. You could release it unfinished at launch and, release patches along the way. That's kind of cheap. So on the one hand, it means that developers are a little less accountable for their deliverance on day one because they can go back in and fix it, a couple of months later. So they don't have to be as diligent in the bug testing. Whereas back in the day, you had to make it perfect, or as perfect as you could be, as you were willing to. Otherwise, it was not going to sell well. But if we didn't have that, would we necessarily have games as good today? Is the quality of development, despite the technology being better, paid less attention to in terms of game design? Or is it because the size and scope of games are just that much bigger, so it is to be expected that many more problems are to occur, right? Game file sizes are tremendously larger than they were in the NES through even Gamecube days, right? Those generations. So I guess it is good that we have the patches, but sometimes it is a little bit of a crutch that developers know we can always fix it later. Not to say anybody wants to. I mean, we're seeing, which is one of our stories today, and we'll move on to that slide right now. It's Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Pokemon Shining Pearl. There's a day one patch. There are things that were forgotten to include that were important in the game. Key things, and you have to download it day one. Gosh, if it wasn't for the digital era, you would release this cartridge and then boom, how would it get out there? How would people accept it when they're going into their Targets, Best Buys, Walmarts? I want to say Toys R Us's, but Toys R Us's aren't exactly around anymore, but they're coming back in a way. You know what I mean? You'd have a major problem on your hands. So you could say, just like in that Rockstar story, hey, they kind of messed up. Well, Nintendo, Pokemon Company, kind of messed up a little bit with this one too. What if someone didn't have internet access and they bought a cartridge and they couldn't do this update? What would happen to them? Although this is a smaller thing because it has been found prior to launch. They worked on it, and in time for day one launch, here it is, right? So realistically, no one's going to really notice the fault of this game not being 100% legit in time for launch, whereas the Rockstar one, a lot of time was spent not catching it, and it released the way it was. But that being said, here is the little 20-second or so, 19-second it seems, trailer for the launch of Pokemon. The game's come a long way, in my opinion, since the February 2021 initial reveal. I thought that the graphical style back then was fine, albeit a little bit simple, but they definitely added some more shine, some more bloom. Polygon models, texture, lighting have all improved. There are a couple of shots where, you could see some layers of depth in the field. Even though it still is a simplistic design, you could see some nice shadows, some nice lighting. Pokemon models are looking good as well. Water, cool, crisp, clear. I have no doubt that the games are going to sell extremely well this weekend and throughout the holidays. It's quite a time. We had the Palkia and Dialga Nintendo Switch Lite model that just came out, the previous week, and now the game's dropped. It's going to be a lot of nostalgia for people around the world playing, and I'm pretty excited to get gamers' impressions that are first-timers to both these entries, and for long-time purists. What did you think? Did you like it? Did you buy the double pack? Either or, neither? You're just not interested? All around, makes for good conversation. All right, moving along. It is Thursday morning. Well, Friday morning today. I'm so used to doing these on Thursday, but it is Friday. It is one day later. Thank you to Chris1964 for this chart. He got it from the Famitsu page. Like I said, you could go to Famitsu.com and get these yourself, which I have done in the past. But over on the installbaseforum.com forums, there's a nice community. Chris puts these charts together, and it's just a cool place. Everything's nicely laid out. Other people are involved in composing charts, and it's pretty cool. So if you're a salesperson like me, you find a place like this, and it's a cool community to be a part of. Anyways, these are the Famitsu sales for week 46 of 2021, which occupy that November 8th through November 14th time frame. At number 1 is the newly released Shin Megami Tensei 5 for Nintendo Switch, with physical sales alone of 143,247 copies sold. This puts it, without taking any digital sales into consideration, at the number 3 spot for the highest opening Shin Megami Tensei game in Japanese history. It honestly probably is certainly number 2, because a very small percentage of the overall sales could be digital, and that would be enough to push it. And I will show you just in a moment how close it is to being number 2. It has to do around 22% digital to make it that other 42,000 more needed to make it number 1, which beats the previous number 1, which is somewhere around the 182,000 mark. And a ratio split of like 78 to 22 doesn't seem like much. 78% being physical, 22% being digital. We see that oftentimes, a lot more like this, like 60-40. But when it comes to RPGs in Japan, you see a lot heavier of a draw go physical. So it's not necessarily a complete given that the game is going to have that high of an attach rate digitally, 40% category. I don't think so. If it's 20% or less, it just misses that number 1 best opening Shin Megami Tensei game ever, which it would be just behind Shin Megami Tensei 4 on 3DS by a little bit, but still really high up there. There's a little bit of a supply constraint in Japan. The special edition definitely was a little bit out of stock. Even the normal edition, I have a report that indicates that 180,000 or fewer is the amount of total physical copies made available to Japan in its opening weekend, and that contains both the regular edition and the special. So you could also say that if around 80% or more of the stock was sold out, that does make it a little bit harder to find. That means some stores were sold out. That leads credence to expecting that the digital sales would be a little bit higher as a result. Not quite as high as some digital games go, but if you're thinking 18 to 20 is all it could do, I think that 22 to 25 might be possible. Some of that's speculation talk, but it's from years of analytics and studying video game sales and other markets and statistics that I don't think it's too far-fetched to expect that that probably is a thing that happened with SMT5. Anyways, with that out of the way, at number 2 is Mario Party Superstars, which didn't have too bad of a drop, only 45%, and it sold 45 copies for the week. At 3 is the Nintendo Switch build of Dragon Quest X, Heavenly Heroes Online, with 22,702 debut. At 4 is Ring Fit Adventure for Nintendo Switch, with 12,921 copies sold. At number 5 is the PlayStation 4 version of Dragon Quest X, and you can see that split of 22,000 to 11,000. The Nintendo Switch version sold almost twice as well as the PS4 version. At 6 is the PS4 version of Call of Duty Vanguard with 40,040 copies. At 7th spot is Animal Crossing New Horizons for Nintendo Switch with 9,286 copies sold. At 8 is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with 8,886 copies. 9 is Minecraft on Nintendo Switch with 8,798 copies sold. And at 10 is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate with 8,608 copies sold. It's an 8-2 split of Nintendo Switch to PlayStation 4, rounding out the top 10. It's good to see some new titles on here. It's nice to see some evergreens. I'm really happy, and that's why I spent so much time talking about it, Shin Megami Tensei 5, because it's a smaller series from Atlas. The title is exclusive for Nintendo Switch, at least for now. There's some coding in there that suggests that it might come to PS4 and PC, but we don't know. If it does, I'd imagine that it's about a 1-year gap in between the versions, Nintendo Switch and others. But this title opened up well enough in Japan and seemed to have a pretty strong presence online and even in things like the Amazon online sales and across social media and whatnot, conversation talk, that I'm pretty sure that SMT5 in the West did better than any of the previous entries. I think this game is a easy 1 million lock, probably an easy 1.5 million lock. How much farther beyond 1.5 does it go? Hard to say, but I'm hoping it does well because it's really fun. It's very well designed. It's got great gameplay, really nice visuals, lots of voice acting, cool animations, plenty of characters. Like, it's awesome. If you like Final Fantasy, if you like Dragon Quest, Persona, Shin Megami Tensei, well, you would know if you like Shin Megami Tensei if you played it before. But if you're a fan of Japanese-centric RPGs, you're probably going to like this. Maybe even if you like Monster Hunter or Pokemon, they kind of, are different. But, sometimes you like one game and someone recommends you another game that, oh, trust me, it's kind of like this. And you just don't like it. But more often than not, if you're a fan of blank and enough people compare it to blank, you might like blank. You know what I mean? Like, that's one of the things that, I'm deviating from sales talk for a moment, but it's one of the things that gets me is the closed-mindedness aspect sometimes that gamers have for a franchise that they're unfamiliar with. This happened a lot back in the day. Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, 3 came out. Sonic the Hedgehog came out. Oh, trust me, if you like Mario, you'll probably like Sonic. It's different. It looks different. It's a little bit faster. The worlds move a little bit differently, but it's got that similar, 2D side-scrolling mechanic, jumping on characters and finding little paths and stuff like that. And some people would be just totally against trying out something new. Maybe you were a Sega kid and you were somehow missed a different age group, and you played Sonic 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and someone's recommending, oh, check out Super Mario World and Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island on SNES. It's okay if you didn't play the NES ones. You like Sonic the Hedgehog trilogy? Try this. It's different. The worlds are bigger. It's a little bit slower paced, but more hidden gaps here and there and a lot of power-ups. You've got this Yoshi character. The second game totally changes up the graphics with, don't touch the fuzzies and like cool stuff. And some people, no, I'm not into that. Just Sonic. I've met plenty of people like that in life. You like Street Fighter, so you can't like Mortal Kombat. You're a fan of Virtua Fighter, so you can't like Dead or Alive. Come on. Get with the modern times. Be a fan of everything. You could like The Legend of Zelda and be recommended God of War, and they're not identical, but they share enough similar qualities that it's like if you like this type of action movie, you'll probably like this type of action movie. If you can appreciate Shotokan karate as a martial art form, you could probably appreciate Taekwondo as an art form. It goes with, almost anything in life, that there doesn't have to be this bias or this animosity between companies. I think the video game culture is a very interesting one because it does have a tribalistic nature to it, and I get that, trust me. Kind of like how sports have a very, you associate your sports team with your city, your college, your state, your team, your colors, whatever. That's your favorite. And some people take that favorite to they hate everything else that's the opponent. Some people take it to, that's my favorite, but I like all of these other teams. I like those logos. I like those players. I understand that those players could switch back and forth. But with video games, some are on that side of, I only like this, everything else has to suck. Or, this could be my favorite, but I like everything else too. Do you have this approach in life when it comes to food? You like cheeseburgers. Okay. Do you only eat at Carl's Jr., or do you not have that type of tribalistic mentality where I won't touch McDonald's or Burger King or Five Guys or In-N-Out or Tommy's or Lunchbox or, Doghouse or anything else out there, right? Most people don't. So why do you do it with games? Well, some of the people with games are like the way they are with sports, and that's why I get it. It's okay to have a favorite. It's okay to root for a favorite. It's okay to appreciate one company more for what they've done, and even knock another company for doing some things wrong or not having the best business practice or the best outward statements. But to outright refuse to play something, even third-party games. Some people won't touch a third-party game, even though it's not made from one of the big three or one of the big four, if you count Sega back in the day, because they view it as that IP doesn't belong on that console. I won't play SMT5 on PlayStation. I won't play Crash Bandicoot on Nintendo. And it's just kind of a weird thing at that point. In your sports team, if you're a fan of the Rams and one of your players that you like on your team gets, traded over to the Chargers or traded over to the 49ers or to the Buccaneers or anyone, are you going to stop liking that guy playing? Likewise, if someone else, if a Tom Brady goes from a well-known team and then he goes to a different team, goes from Patriots to Buccaneers, you're going to all of a sudden stop liking him? You followed this guy for 20 years? You're still going to like him, right? You're still going to play Street Fighter if it's on PlayStation as an exclusive, even if you grew up with it on Nintendo. You're still going to like Perfect Dark if it moves over here, if it went to here, and vice versa, and all this kind of stuff. I know I'm totally deviating from sales, but it really made me think of the state of the industry and the state of the minds of many people. And I'm curious to see, who are you? Where do you stand? Do you look at everything with an open, fair eye? Or do you have this mentality, this kind of cultural identity for some reason that you have ingrained so profoundly with a game, a sports team, a restaurant, a type of food, a genre of music, that you cannot like anything else? Are you someone that could watch Star Trek and Star Wars? Are you someone that could like DC and Marvel? You get what I'm saying? You look at more and more of life and you're like, wait a minute. All of these other categories, I have my favorites, but I like the other thing too. I could like Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers. You don't have to hate one just because you like the other. So in gaming, in sports, they seem to be the two really prominent ones that have a strong rivalry. In some cases, not necessarily even necessary, right? Do you have a loyalty to a TV brand? Will you not watch a certain movie on a certain company's DVD player? Come on, where does it end, right? All right, moving on. On the hardware side of things, we have at the number one spot the Nintendo Switch with 87,267 copies sold. At 2 is PlayStation 5 with 4,910. At 3 is Xbox Series at 2,593. At 4 is the PlayStation 4 with 1,399. And at 5 is the Nintendo 3DS with 417. The Nintendo Switch sold just 3,000 copies fewer than it did the previous week. A fair amount less than it did last year. PS5 had a pretty bad drop of more than half off. Xbox Series amazingly sold neck and neck exactly with what it did last week. PS4 had a good jump of almost doubling. 3DS is just several units shy of what it did last week. If you look at the gap between this year to date and last year to date on Nintendo Switch, you're starting to see that last year, 2020, is pulling ahead more and more. With the chip shortage being real, with stock being somewhat scarce, in particular the Nintendo Switch OLED model, they just can't make enough right now. I could see that 2020 might pull it off. But I think that if Nintendo could make enough in Japan, 2021 would win, because SMT5 did launch, and it did launch pretty strong. A new Mario Party Superstars game in the holidays, That's pretty strong. A Big Brain Academy, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl releasing now. Those are all some pretty big heavy hitters, more so than what we had in 2020 at its last couple of month period. Plus Metroid Dread, a couple of other titles. They're going to get some boosts for the holiday season. So we'll see if 2021 can eclipse 2020's. If you look at the specific breakdown, most PS5s were purchased as physical versions. Most Xbox Series were purchased as Series S types. Nintendo Switch, we got the OLED at $23,000, the Lite at $17,000, and the base Switch at $46,000. Nintendo is actually still holding lotteries in Japan for people to get the opportunity to be one of the people that might be able to get a Nintendo Switch OLED model. Like, the thing has got launch hype around it. Here it's been out for 5+ weeks, as it did drop on October 8th, and it's just sold out. They can't make enough. But I think that they're also holding some stock for this weekend, right? Like, you're going to see a massive jump next week because of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. At least I hope. I hope Nintendo has enough. As far as how much will the Nintendo Switch software charts represent, it's going to be kind of crazy. I did mention before, by the way, going back a little bit into the software side of things, just how did Shin Megami Tensei 5 do on the Nintendo Switch compared to other versions. That first week, this is my own chart, 143,247 is what it did on Nintendo Switch. Obviously, this is the lifetime to date. You see that with just 8,000 digital, it would clear Nocturne on PS2 and become the number 2 spot in the series. But if it manages to do like 22+%, which isn't a lot, it could bust out 185,000 and easily be, well, not easily, but it can clearly be the new best opening game in franchise history in Japan. Also, when you take into consideration that Shin Megami Tensei 5 on Nintendo Switch costs more than the 3DS version, not even talking about the special edition, which is even a higher cost SKU, yeah, Atlas is definitely making some money. So pretty cool to see that it's overall doing quite well. All right, next up, this was technically yesterday. I did make a celebratory video for the Nintendo Gamecube turning 20 years old in Japan this past September. So I didn't make another designated video for the North American launch, but I thought I'm still going to throw up my picture, still celebrate and still talk about it, although just one day later. Yeah, Nintendo Gamecube turned 20 years old yesterday, so happy anniversary to the system in the North American market. This was the first console that I camped out for. I went to my Target store at like 2 in the morning, camped out, hung out on the bench, had some hot chocolate and sleeping bag. I remember my dad drove me to the Target, and I was out there like second or third in line, I think, and I purchased my black Nintendo Gamecube. This was the first console that I purchased all by myself. I was 18, I was working, and I was able to afford it, make my own console purchase. I actually had 2 games already picked up a couple of weeks prior, because at my local GameStop they were selling Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader for the system ahead of launch. So I just had fun opening the boxes up, checking out these miniature GameCube proprietary discs, and excited for that launch. The system was a special one. Like I said, my personal first self-purchased video game system. Nintendo changed up the controller big time with the Nintendo GameCube controller, with its 4-face button layout being different than the now iconic SNES design, which is kind of wild to think, because as iconic as the SNES design was, Nintendo didn't use it on every system going forward as a guarantee. N64, they went with 6. GameCube, they went with this 4. Wii, they went something very different. They brought it back for Wii U, though. And technically in Wii, they brought it back for the Classic controller and the Classic Controller Pro, but those weren't really associated with Wii. So Wii U is when they really brought back that 4-button layout design. You could say though that, well, with DS and with 3DS, they also had that 4-button layout design. So it didn't go completely until Wii U status or Nintendo Switch status where they brought it back. But now it's definitely here with the Pro Controller. I wouldn't mind a new modernized take on the GameCube controller. And yeah, we can play with this controller on the Nintendo Switch, like literally this controller, which is awesome thanks to the adapter. But I mean like a modern Pro Controller where it's wireless like the Pro Controller. A modern GameCube controller that's like the Pro Controller in that it is wireless. It does have HD rumble applied to it. Go ahead and officially throw on a ZL button. Kind of change the position a little bit so that ZL and ZR would be more easily accessible. Make L and R the same as they are, but just kind of curve them down a little bit. Make that yellow analog stick a little bit bigger and give it the ability, I should say, to click in. Make that left analog stick have the ability to click in. Throw in some motion control. Make that D-pad a little bit bigger. Shift over the start button a little bit so that you have your plus and minus, or your start and select. Well, specifically, that would have to be a start. Make a select or make a plus out of the start button. Make a minus out of the select button. Introduce a home button on it. Introduce a capture button on it. And give it the ability to read NFC. And now you have a really cool alternative retro/modern controller that could work with all Nintendo Switch games and everything moving forward, right? You want to play a modern first-person shooter on Nintendo Switch, but you want to play, Doom or Doom Eternal or something like that with this controller, you can. Because even though you can use this controller for something like Breath of the Wild, for instance, you don't have every piece of functionality. That's kind of the problem with the N64 controller is, you can't map it out exactly. So you could play Breath of the Wild or Super Mario Odyssey with it, but there's no Y, there's no X, and they won't just let you map it to a C button, unfortunately. So there are some limitations. But this controller really is that kind of last controller of the old school era, yet almost at that cusp of having everything in it that was needed going forward. You know what I mean? You could even vouch and say that controllers these days have too much, but regardless of whether or not that's your take in that they have too much, we do use a lot of those buttons and functionalities and clicks and stuff like that on controllers, so I guess it's here to stay. The video game industry has just expanded as a medium, so might as well update this controller just a little bit. But anyways, great console. I talked about it before. Luigi's Mansion, eventually Super Mario Sunshine, The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, which came on this, but I associate it a little bit more with Wii since that's the console that I purchased it on at launch. Beautiful Joe, the return of Capcom thunderously on the platform. Capcom versus SNK2 Beautiful Joe, Resident Evil Remake, Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Resident Evil 4, exclusive to the system for a good 10 months or so. Great console. Should have sold better, but I could see why Nintendo really shifted gears afterwards, because this was the last powerhouse Nintendo system, NES, SNES, N64, Nintendo GameCube, they were at the, forefront of technology in their respective eras, going boom, 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 boom. But their sales went boom, 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 boom. So Nintendo had to do something different because they were losing market value. They were losing market share, and their brand name wasn't as popular. Now, fortunately, they did a great job with their consoles and specifically with their software over the years, that they were able to define generations and pass through and really set the tone for this thing called nostalgia, and have nostalgia for multiple groups of people at multiple ages, for multiple systems and multiple software, right? So you've got people of all ages and backgrounds who grew up as a kid playing Nintendo Entertainment System, as Super Nintendo, kids that were teens during N64, or kids that grew up with Gamecube, kids or teens that grew up with Wii, first-time console owners being Wii U, or now first-time console owners being around Nintendo Switch, right? They've kept on building and building this empire while, paying tribute to the past very specifically, so not overly bombarding everyone with access to everything from the old school right away, but trying to cleverly place it out. I know some people give Nintendo a lot of garbage or criticism on not having everything available at once at all the time, but from a business perspective, you give too much at once and it loses its luster. Not to say trickle feed, but delivering in a timely manner keeps old things fresh and relevant all over again. So, yeah, I could see why anyways, going back to the original thought. Wii was what was the next system. And speaking of Wii, happy 15th anniversary to Wii. This is a much longer video than I thought I would be doing today, but you know what? It's a lot of fun. You get me talking about sales, you get me reading off some news from Rockstar and trying to, look at it both from a company perspective, from a fan perspective. Are they doing it right? Should they have done better? Holding people accountable, but also, giving folks a little bit of a benefit of the doubt and realizing that it's difficult, and what you do next is what's most important, right? I'm just going to talk about a lot of gaming stuff and have a fun video discussion. And that brings me to the last point, and that is Wii. Like I said, 15th anniversary. This was a powerhouse. Technically more powerful than the Nintendo Gamecube, it had more RAM and more computing capabilities, but not a powerhouse of a console at the time. It came out a year after the Xbox 360 and neck pretty much with the PlayStation 3. It was a lot weaker spec-wise than those two, but what it did for the industry was truly shake it up. Nintendo believed, and I believe that they were right at the end of the day, that the video game industry would eventually reach a saturation point of, yeah, it's getting bigger, it's growing by more people, but eventually you're going to get to a point where fewer and fewer percentage-wise people are entering the industry if all you're doing is introducing new graphics and better graphics and more complex controls. The people that liked Mario here are going to like the bigger, better Mario, going to like the bigger, better Mario, the bigger, better Mario. The people like, Crash Bandicoot or Tony Hawk or Halo or Gears of War, whatever franchise, Street Fighters and Mortal Kombats and Final Fantasies, and okay, some new games, some new genres, some new IPs, just bigger and better graphics. They're going to exist. The old fans are going to continue. Some will taper off. Some new ones will be like, oh, cool, what's everybody talking about? What's the newest, Mario? What's the newest, Metal Gear Solid game that's out? Castlevania, Mega Man, whatever. But how do you hook an untapped market? How do you bring video games to more people than ever before? Well, you change the design and you make it so simple and so easily understandable that everyone holds a remote controller at some point in their life. Probably. I mean, if you're living in a modern world and you've got access to a TV, you probably held a remote controller. You probably understand what it's like to point something. Like a flashlight. Most people have pointed a flashlight and understand, what this axis of Y and X is achievable, what it can do, on a wall. Giving somebody one tethered analog stick for their thumb, able to switch it around for left-handed or right-handed gamers. Motion. People understand the simple concept of swinging a racket or bowling, rolling a ball, or batting. Maybe not everyone is good at those real life actions, those sports, but they found a fantastic way how to get people to try out Wii with Wii Sports bundled in. The system cost $250. That means it probably could have cost $200, but in the United States and most markets for most of the console's life, they paired it with Wii Sports. Japan didn't have it bundled in, for that matter, as an example. And it set the world on fire in the best way possible. The system was backwards compatible with Nintendo GameCube. You could open up its top and have 4 controller ports. It even had access to, providing 2 memory card slots to play your old games. It had a message board service. It allowed you to transfer messages, send messages and pictures to your friends. It had a digital presentation. And actually, at the time, a really awesome digital service in the Virtual Console. This was the first for Nintendo systems. It really played up on that nostalgia because at this point, man, from 1983 to 2006, that's a 23-year gap from Famicom to Wii. Even if you go from the North American 1985 NES launch to Wii in 2006, that's still 21 years. That's a lot of different ages of gamers, right? I was born in 83. For me, I just graduated university in 2006 at 22, and later on I turned 23, and that's how old I was when I got Wii. I was a kinesiology student. I was studying the art of the physical body and human body development and movement from a physiological, neuromuscular, skeleton perspective, trying to get people to be more physically fit, more active, looking at martial arts and corresponding martial arts with torque and velocity and different angles, and coming up with ways to teach people about the different breaking down, different martial arts and comparing and contrasting them, looking at the art behind physical movement and understanding how to maximize muscles from a musculoskeletal standpoint, health, nutrition, angles, etc. Being a massive gamer, teaching, personal training, teaching martial arts, finishing up my degree, going to E3 in May of 2006 to be able to play this, graduate within a couple of weeks, and then get this hot item. I knew it was going to be a hit. I just knew it was going to be a smashing success. We had a highly sophisticated balance board next to our kinesiology department in the Brown Center, which was a place for physical rehabilitation that we worked with people. CSUN, my university, was a fantastic place and still is, as I work there nowadays, where it really had a great program for the disabled, where one of the things we had, which was the first on the West Coast in a university, was a pool in which the floor can completely raise up from being 10 feet deep, so you had 10 feet of water, and the entire floor raised up to being surface level. So you could have somebody who isn't strong enough to walk on his or her own, let's say it's a 5 foot tall person, not strong enough to walk on their own, you could raise the floor to being, 4 feet tall, and now they have their weight displaced by the water and they can walk. And as they get stronger and stronger, you raise the floor up more, which makes the water less, and now there's 3.5 feet of water, 3 feet of water, 2.5 feet of water, etc. You could do this with adults, with children, people with gait issues, etc. We had another pool with temperature controlled water that we could change it almost on the fly, underwater treadmills, pulleys with swings to put people in the water. Every piece of exercise equipment was on a forward and backwards axis, so you could hop in and maximize the machine doing pushes and pulls at once, doing curls and presses at once with the fly, machines to get people to stand up. It was terrific stuff. It was a wonderful place, but I kind of went a little bit over on that. One of the things we had was a sophisticated balance board, which was a circular board and a screen on top. And you stood on the board and you could hold onto the sides, and as you shifted to the left or to the right on screen, your little reticle would go to the left and right. And as you shifted back and forward, your reticle would go down and up. And there were little games like hitting this square, hitting this square, hitting this square, hitting this square, finding a perfect balance. And it was so sophisticated that you could make it feel like you were in molasses, just rolling around, going very slow, which was for people with balance issues. You could also make it on like a pin, otherwise just like the slightest motion, you were going to fall off for highly athletic people to try to get. Can you get to there? Can you control your muscles so perfectly to get there? Can you reach this dot point, right? And when Nintendo eventually unveiled the Wii Balance Board, I thought that's going to be the next big target, because the Wii Balance Board brought what they were doing from a kinesiology standpoint of bridging video games as a source of entertainment with exercise and mobility progression with motion controls to now balancing. And I thought this is going to be a hit too. So, from the other side of me that's not video games, that is physical, fitness, martial arts, exercise, the Wii was the perfect platform. It married both of those things together. And, that's how I personally viewed the system in anticipation of launch. I camped out for this one. I actually camped out at a couple of different places, at a Toys R Us for a pre-order and at a Walmart for my actual, it's available at midnight, so I was able to pick it up, bought the console myself. Went home, played Twilight Princess, and I was just having a lot of fun. Like personally, running around, swinging the Wii remote around, that was a new experience in a franchise that for so many years already I was in love with. And there are boss battles that I was up and swinging in front of my TV. And really, that combined with Wii Sports at launch was terrific. It was showing gamers like, hey, you're going to get actual video games from Nintendo's backlog on this system, but it's also going to let people, maybe folks with cerebral palsy that don't have the fine motion controls, or finger dexterity, I should say, to pull off crazy advanced combos in games, be able to move around. It's going to allow developers a little bit more creativity to think beyond it. You could take that Wii remote and hold it sideways, and it's reminiscent of an NES controller. Later would come out Classic Controller, Classic Controller Pro to play games like this. It still had some fighting games like Mortal Kombat. Punch-Out came back on it, which was great. Tatsunoko versus Capcom. First-person shooters were still present. We had a few titles like The Conduit and, Call of Duty's, the GoldenEye remake, kind of. Not really a remake, but a different take on GoldenEye. We had Super Mario Galaxy, New Super Mario Bros., Wii, Mad World, The Legend of Zelda, Twilight Princess, and eventually tail end Skyward Sword. There were a lot of third-party games. A lot of it is what people refer to as shovelware, but hey, it reaches its own market. The game still satisfied many core gamers. You got your Mario Kart Wii, you got your Super Smash Bros. Brawl. It was overall a terrific system. It went from this decline of NES, SNES, N64, GameCube to Wii being the highest selling Nintendo home console of all time. And this was in a generation where Wii and DS were in tandem selling like hotcakes, right? 101 million Wiis, 155 million DSs. You combine those together, 256 million pieces of hardware in that generation. I don't even think that Nintendo Switch could achieve 256 million. I think Nintendo Switch will blow past 140. I think it will hit 160. I think it's possible to hit like 210. From a software perspective, Nintendo Switch is doing better than Wii or DS. No Nintendo platform has hit 1 billion in terms of software, but Wii and DS got close. Nintendo Switch is still a little ways away, but I fully expect Nintendo Switch will be the one to do it. All the more props to Nintendo Switch on, I think, it being the most strong, healthiest Nintendo console and time frame of Nintendo ever. Even stronger than Wii and DS during that era. And I know you would say, like, well, why? Because if you combine those two, they sold better, and not just more hardware, but more software. But because I think the ratio and the quality and the output and the timing in between releases and the amount of genres being explored is better on Nintendo Switch. And it just seems like at this point in its life has more life left to live. So even if it by itself doesn't sell as well as the other two combined, it overall can be good enough that it on its own could equal more weight than those two combined. But that's my opinion. We'll also see. We'll see how much longer the Nintendo Switch generation can last. But so far, I think it's Nintendo's strongest. But back to Wii, a lot of fun. Some very big sellers. Some games that probably should have sold more. Stuff like Skyward Sword came out at the end of the launch. At the end of the console's lifespan. People were kind of over the Wii Motion Plus even that came with Skyward Sword, requiring it to be played. But we saw Skyward Sword come out later on, a decade later on Nintendo Switch in Skyward Sword HD, already outselling the Wii version in its lifetime. But the game system was great. Metroid Prime Trilogy was fantastic. Metroid Prime 3, for that matter, as part of that trilogy, before the trilogy came out, was a brilliant title, in my opinion. Just under Metroid Prime, I think, in terms of my favorites of that trilogy. And yeah, it did a lot of good. It would have been fascinating, and this makes me want to do this kind of thing more often, and that's create a what-if scenario of what if the Wii U came out in November 2010 instead of November 2012. Same power level, but what if it didn't have the gamepad accessory built in, but since next March of 2011 the 3DS would end up coming out anyways, that was the unit that took advantage of this communication between TV and handheld. And that up front, the Wii U, which would be called Wii 2 instead in November of 2010, would be what it was from a power perspective. But like I said, the 3DS coming out later would be what that gamepad was. That's just one random idea. But what would that have done for Nintendo? Because Wii sales hit really hard, and then after a while, they kind of tapered off. You do cut into some of those 101 million if you do introduce a Wii U in November 2010. So maybe the system, caps off at like 22, but Wii U coming out 2 years early means that it's the most powerful console on the market for 3 years until PS4 and Xbox One come out. So for 3 years, there's more incentive for developers to be porting over Mortal Kombat 9 and Street Fighter 4 to it, and Final Fantasy 13 to it, and Grand Theft Auto 4 to it, and the Batman titles and stuff like that. So maybe Wii U, instead of being this 13 million seller, would have been a 14 million seller. And then you look at, all right, we gave the date of 2010 for Wii U, which sounds kind of wild because that's a full 2 years earlier. And maybe Nintendo Switch comes out November 2016, 6 years later. And it's that fully realized concept that they had back in the day with the Wii U, which they didn't quite do because, like I said, they didn't go with the gamepad. They went with the 3DS 4 months later as the gamepad. And they had this marriage between the two. 3DS played its own games, Wii U played its own games, but 3DS would act as a gamepad for Wii U. And you couldn't take those Wii U games on the go, but in the household, with a proximity to the system, you could have that functionality. It's a fascinating thought. What could have happened? Would the 3DS sales have been that much different? Would they have sold a little bit more? And by the time Nintendo Switch came along, it'd be 6 years. Coulda, woulda, shoulda, hard to say. I remember talking with Nintendo internally when they first dropped the Wii U name, and they actually released a statement saying they're not completely stuck to it, but they're pretty sure that this is what it's going to be. But thank you for all of your thoughts. I was saying, even before that announcement officially came out from Nintendo, I would really consider changing it. I don't have a good feeling of how people are going to accept the U add-on. I had some internal talks behind the scenes at E3 and stuff like that, but obviously they went with it. That being said, I think Wii U was a better system than its public perception made it out to be. It should have sold better, but hey, we got Nintendo Switch. We are where we are. Nintendo's a fun company to follow and to be a fan of. It's a roller coaster. Even in the lows, you still get highs in terms of quality software, but it is more fun when they're doing better, because then you know that more people are enjoying the thing that you love, and then Nintendo does more within the ecosystem because they can, and they have a bigger budget, and they have more creativity and more happiness to spread and stuff like that. All right, I think this might make this video the longest video game news / video game talk video I've ever done because of the topics today. So, happy 15th anniversary, Wii. You brought motion controls with you. You brought balance board and exercises with you. And you really brought a lot of fun to the industry with a compelling logo. I love the Gamecube logo, by the way. That GC, beautiful. N64 logo, loved it too. The Wii logo, very smooth. The Wii Would Like to Play campaign, very smooth. The W, the two eyes, the eyes representing people, but also representing the Wii remotes. The name, clever. We, us to play together. Yeah, good stuff. All right, that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, congratulations. This was a lot of fun. All right, have a good one, everybody. Take it easy. Bye.